Justin from the University of Queensland. So take it away.
Alrighty, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the final talk of the day. I know that you're all feeling very tired, cognitively fatigued, so what we're going to do is start off with a quiz. So, a bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? You got your answer? Great. Who's seen this question before? Put your hands up. Awesome. For those of you who haven't yet seen this question before, it comes from a test called the Cognitive Reflection Test. Originally, it was 3 items that looked just like this, came out around 2005. Now, you can probably guess by the name of this test is that what it's supposed to be measuring is cognitive reflection. So, what is this thing called cognitive reflection? I'll give you what the story is in the literature so far, and we can have a look at what that really means. So, we answer this question with often an intuition that springs to mind. For many people, that intuition tells us that 10 cents is the answer. So then we have this intuition and we do this thing called reflection. We inhibit ourselves from providing our intuitive response as the solution. We do some sums and we realize, hang on, that doesn't quite work out. Then we do some more sums and we realize, oh, actually, the answer is 5 cents. The ball is 5 cents, the bat is $1.05, which brings us to our total of $1.10. Beautiful. So what's going on with this process here is supposedly something that looks like this. We have an intuition and then we do reflection, which is the thing, the magic ingredient that produces the correct answer. So we have these characters playing these different roles then in this test, intuition and reflection, and they have their different personalities. And their personalities are very informed by this dual process theory of cognition, which places cognition into two very neat little bins, right? So we have type 1 thinking. It's the kind of thinking that happens to you. 2 plus 2 is, yep, and it just happens, right? It's fast, effortless, automatic, and it's non-conscious. Non-conscious meaning we don't have conscious access to where that came from. Type 2 thinking is this slow, effortful, deliberate kind of thinking. It feels harder to do, right? So this is what underlies our kind of understanding of the mechanics of performance on this test. So again, high scores on this test are supposed to be representing a greater propensity to engage in cognitive reflection, a greater propensity to be using this type 2 kind of processing. And the original test, if you have a look at Google Scholar, it's been cited about 6,500 times. It's one of the most popular tests in all of cognitive science. And what you'll see is that a lot of those citations come from papers where we've used your performance on the cognitive reflection test as a correlate with a lot of other kind of skills and abilities and beliefs, and we end up with things like this. So your performance on the test predicts how good you are at detecting fake news, whether you believe in climate science, your political ideology, your perception of conspiracy theories, and many, many other things, right? It seems to correlate with just about everything you can throw at it. And because it does, what we end up with is a lot of claims then about the importance of analytic thinking, of critical thinking, system 2 thinking. If we're going to be able to detect fake news, then we've got to use more analytic thinking. And that's a great story. Feels like it makes sense. The problem is that when we got to make claims about the importance of these kinds of things, we want to make damn sure that the cognitive reflection test is a measure of something like analytic thinking. And what we're starting to see in recent evidence is that maybe something a bit funny is going on. Thanks to Wendy for this awesome introduction to this kind of issue, by the way. So what we're finding is that when people actually solve the problems correctly, there's evidence to suggest that they do so on the basis of their first response. So they don't say 10 cents, hang on, let me check and change my mind to 5 cents. They say 5 cents, straight off the bat. There's also evidence that people who fail the problems, nevertheless, through problem solving, actually demonstrate evidence of a reflective process. So we've got these two groups of folks then who have either high or low test scores, but these test scores aren't necessarily representing a lot or a little of reflection itself. So this brings me to my work. And indeed, I also wanted to take a closer look at what was going on with this test, but I wanted to have a kind of a novel take on it and look at the role of insight. So when we see this problem and we think 10 cents, if indeed we do, I think that what we're interpreting the problem to actually be asking in the first place is probably something more like this. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total, the bat costs $1, how much does the ball cost? In this case, this interpretation, 10 cents is the correct answer. So in order for a reflective process that goes back and checks that intuition to be successful, what needs to happen is that we need to reorient our attention, notice this part of the question, and because we've noticed the important features of the question, we can therefore begin to actually make some headway on the problem. So what I'm talking about here is this thing called cognitive restructuring, which refers to the process of being able to take an initial representation of the problem, shift your perception of that problem in order to produce new insights. So cognitive restructuring can come about in a couple of different ways. We can come to this kind of shift in our perspective through that analytic kind of process that we've already kind of alluded to, which is a more stepwise and gradual process. Each kind of step in the logic path that I take brings me closer to my solution. Or we can get to that same kind of cognitive restructuring through insight. Now, I probably don't really need to do much explanation here at all because everyone in this room has had an insight or an aha moment at some point in their lives. Some are stronger than others. So it's that moment when you go, ah, and you've got it, right? And because that moment feels like that, it's sudden, it's unexpected, sometimes it happens when we're not even thinking about any particular problem at all. You can see how it's qualitatively different from that gradual, slow analytic process. When you do have the answer, in hindsight, it's completely obvious, right? How did you not see that before? It usually feels good to have that insight moment. You feel confident and sure of yourself. And we know from the literature now that there is a very strong relationship between objective accuracy and the occurrence of insight. So what this means is that this little list of ingredients for insight means that it doesn't fit nicely into this dual process kind of model of cognition. Some folks say that it kind of has overlapping features with each of the types, but by virtue of overlapping at all with either of them, it means that it stands apart, really, from a dichotomy like that. So what I wanted to do is have a look at what might be going on with the cognitive reflection test with insight, if anything at all, right? So what I did was I conducted a think aloud protocol. So what that looked like is that I got participants to come into the lab one at a time, set them up in front of a video camera and a laptop. Gave them the instructions on what they'll be doing, including a full lesson on what it means to think aloud. Gave them a couple of practice runs at the task with some feedback, and then what they saw was this. So they began reading the question aloud. As soon as they finished reading the question aloud, they move into verbalizing every thought that they have while problem solving. When they were finished, which they could decide was whenever, they typed their answer in, clicked finish, and then I asked them, did you experience an insight moment? If they did, then they rated the strength of their insight moment. We also had them rate their level of confidence in their answer, and I did this with 100 participants. Each participant saw 19 cognitive reflection problems. And then what I had to do was go back and watch 1,900 individual recorded responses and say something about that. Me and another independent rater. So that's a lot of time that I spent doing this. So when I say coding responses, what I mean, fairly simple process. So either the final solution was right or wrong. Too easy. Then it was a matter of deciding whether the response was reflective or not. Now, reflective means that they had one answer, they reflected on that answer, and they changed their mind in some sense. So that's fairly intuitive, I hope. Now, what did I actually find here? For simplicity, I'm going to show you the raw number of trials of each response type. Okay, remember, if the cognitive reflection test is measuring this thing called reflection, then what we should see is that correct answers should be driven primarily by that correct reflective group. What we instead saw is that most of the correct answers actually came on the basis of participants' first response. So this is replicating the more recent kind of evidence that's coming out that's saying the same thing. Likewise, yeah, sure, most of the incorrect non-reflective responses, that was the majority of that, incorrect category, but we saw a huge chunk of folks who, despite getting the answer wrong, really did actually try to engage in that reflective process. Again, replicates recent work. Now, what the new thing is here that I tried to add was, what is insight doing here? Is it playing a role? So here's the proportion of the insight experience across these different response types. So we can see it happened for all kinds of responses. It was far more common for correct responses, so we've replicated that positive relationship between the occurrence of insight and accuracy. But look at what's going on with this correct reflective group. 65% of the time where people do engage in that more traditional intuition, reflection, and then solution process, they're having an insight moment. Now, let's have a look at what that actually looks like in practice.
A monkey, a squirrel, and a bird are racing to the top of a coconut tree. Who will get the banana first? The monkey, the squirrel, or the bird? Ooh. Immediately I thought it would be the monkey because I associate monkeys with bananas. Is the bird going to be able to? I don't know. Let's do this one. Who's this first? Squirrel and then bird. Oh my god! There's the insight moment!
Indeed it is.
It's not a banana tree!
Okay, so I want to show you that, right, because it's probably the most powerful demonstration that I can give you of one of my real participants having an insight moment that is clearly, qualitatively different from this thing called analytic thinking, at least in its pure form, right? So what does that mean for this test? I think that very broad strokes, right, it means that cognitive reflection tasks are measuring more unconscious processing than we think. Why does that matter? It matters because when we say that it's so important to use more analytic thinking to be able to detect fake news. So what we're going to do is we're going to design some interventions to make people think in a more analytic way. If the basis of those assumptions is coming because we've correlated this test with your ability to detect fake news, then that's a bit of a risk, right? Because that process, that cognitive restructuring process that's coming about through insight is not necessarily going to be trained up by any kind of analytic thinking intervention. Likewise, I mean, again, it's replicating evidence that's already come out, but we saw that the vast majority of correct responses came on the basis of something like intuition, or at least in the absence of reflection, and reflection did not necessarily guarantee accuracy either. So this cognitive reflection test sounds a bit fishy to me. It also means, I don't know, you tell me what you guys reckon, but I think that it means that dual process theory probably doesn't really explain things very well. And I mean, this is dual process theory, it's still one of like the dominant theoretical models in judgment and decision-making literature. I'm hoping that you guys, you fancy active inference guys, have something to actually say about this and to take this field forward, because I think we're well overdue for that. If you'd like to follow my work, feel free to give this a scan, but for now, thanks so much for your time.